Hey guys, and welcome to creating a sci-fi metal floor and substance designer video tutorial. My name is Javier Perez, and I'll be your instructor through this course. In this lesson, we'll be going over the graph from start to finish and covering techniques, thought processes, and general understanding of how the material was made. MSI was kind enough to supply me with a laptop to test out with Substance Designer. Thanks to the performance of the Intel Core i9 and RTX 2080, I'm able to work so much more quickly and efficiently and not have to worry about how complex my graphs are getting. And thanks to its thin and light design, I can make materials anywhere I go. I hope you'll enjoy this one and look forward to sharing my experiences with you. So let's get started. So to get started, I just like going into File and creating a new substance. I'm just going to call this Floor 01. And the first thing I like to do when I'm creating a material is I always like to bring in a base material. Now with the base material, what I can do is I can right click and create the output nodes. So instead of having to manually create the output nodes just by, creating space output node or using a template, I feel like just this gives me a little bit more control on exactly what kind of output nodes I want. So from there, I start bringing in the uniform colors and I set each one of these outputs to something that's pretty neutral. So I like going with gray most of the time. And then I bring in my normal map and I make sure that the project is actually set to OpenGL. So I connect that into the normal, and then I'm connecting all these different nodes with just a single node, because that's going to be the basis of where I start creating my height map. And once that starts kind of getting built, all these other output nodes are just going to follow suit and just going to be connected to what they already need to be. So just always make sure I keep everything nice and clean. So I add the dot nodes and just kind of move them into place. So to get started on this guy, I am going to bring in a shape, and I'm just going to make it kind of just a rectangle shape, bringing down the X and the Y and getting more or less a small little rectangular shape. And I'm going to bring in a trapezoid grayscale, and this is going to pinch the top, so we're going to get almost pretty much just a trapezoid shape here. So one thing I don't like is I don't want it to tile, so I make sure to go into the tiling mode and take off the no tiling, and now we only have a singular shape. And then instantly I kind of get rid of that node that was connected to all the output nodes, and then I just plug it in. That way I can quickly see what is happening with the material. So I make sure to turn on my tessellation factor, my scale, just so I can get a good representation of what's going on in the 3D viewport. From there, I'm just going to take a transform node, and then I'm going to rotate it and scale it down. And I'm just going to put it into place where I think it's going to be a good spot when I mirror it. Keep in mind that I usually go back once I add the mirror grayscale, and with the mirror grayscale I do a mirror center. That way I get the shape that I just had in the transform on all four corners, which is a really nice way to, if you want something to kind of mirror on each corner, it's a kind of a cool trick to get that to happen. And like I said before, I didn't like the shape that was originally plugged in, so I went back in the transform and kind of messed with it a little bit. I then took another shape, made a square, then I inverted it, and this is going to be the edge of our metal panel frame. So like you see here, those kind of indents that I added don't really line up. So once I blended the two together with an add, I had to actually go back to the transform and move it into place. So now we're getting basically the edge of our metal frame currently. So again, I'm just kind of moving into place, making sure it's where I'd like it to be, and just kind of tweaking it at this point. I then go ahead and add a subtle blur, high quality grayscale. You can see once I zoom into the 3D viewport, I just want something subtle, because when you look at it in the 3D viewport, it just makes kind of a really big difference with just a subtle number. You'll notice that before it was super sharp, and then just by adding a small blur, we get like a nice kind of bevel on the actual object. So I always try to add those everywhere I can where I know there's going to be a super hard edge. Continuing on, I bring in another shape, and with this guy, instead of using a mask, what I like to do a lot of the time is use a cropping area inside the blend mode. That way I don't have to create a shape and plug it into the opacity and kind of mask it out that way. The cropping node is a great way to just basically tell the blend like you only want certain areas to blend based on top left, or top bottom left to right. So for that piece, I just added just a uniform, I think it was just a shape, and I cropped out the bottom area. That way we have a nice little stepping kind of piece on the floor. That's where eventually the rubber panel is going to go as well. Moving forward, this is where we're gonna start with the kind of X pattern on the pipes. So what I like to do here is I just brought in a basic polygon, and I went in and squashed it with a transform just to get something that I liked. Again, there might be instances where eventually I'll go back to this shape because it wasn't really looking a certain way. So that's always something to think about, is you can always go back and just change it. Again, like I mentioned before, with just the way the edges were so sharp on this triangle, I made sure to go in and add a subtle blur. This one is a little bit stronger because the reason I add the blur is I'm going to add a level node right after this. And because it's blurred out so much, we're going to get some nice soft kind of curved edges. So that's a cool way to get your edges to curve when you have like a sharp angle or something like that. You don't want to go too far on the levels because it just instantly starts inverting, so keep that in mind. And here, pretty much the same thing that we were doing with those pieces on the frame of the floor, kind of just moving into shape. And I'm going to use the same treatment where I take a mirror grayscale. That way, once I move the original transform, because we have this mirror grayscale, anywhere I move it's just going to mirror. And on top of that, if I'm going to add a transform and just rotate and blend those two together, so anytime I go back with the original transform, it's going to adjust the whole shape that we have going on right now. I did an invert here because I'm going to use this to create an edge for the actual shape of the X. So I just bring down the blacks a little bit. So you see me doing that here. Cool. Sorry, I bring down the whites a little bit. This is because so the way the height map works inside of Substance Designer is once I have it on the white value, it's going to be too high to essentially add anything else because the white is the top peak. So I know down the line I'm going to add some more detail. So I want to be able to have a grayscale value. That way, if I want, I can overlay something on top of it and we'll still be able to see it. And here, this is what I was talking about when I brought in the blur, high quality grayscale, and I leveled it. And I'm just using an edge detect so I can get a nice lip on the edge of that new shape that we have. Just messing with the roundness and the width. Again, I can go back and change these anytime I want if I'd like. So here I inverted it, and then I'm going to take a bevel just to give it a slight bevel. I would say the bevel almost works kind of like the blur node. It just gives it a nice subtle fall off, so it's not as like extreme and hard edge. And here you see me, I blended it on top with an add, but I felt that these kind of lips were a little too big, so I just went back with the edge detect and just kind of lowered that amount. Same with the bevel. When I moved with the distance, it kind of made the lip a little thinner. So here I'm adding another bevel. That way on the interior, we're going to be able to see a slight bevel. So it's not much, but it makes a big difference. And I go back to our original shape, and I'm using it just to mask out the center pieces where the black areas are. So you can see there we have from 0 to 1, you can kind of see that nice little bevel that we're introducing there. And like I mentioned before, how I wanted to add some more detail. I just want to do a tiling kind of just circular pattern on this guy. And had I left the pattern on the white, I probably wouldn't be able to height blend this guy because we were already on the peak white value. Anything I added on top just wouldn't be seen because these shapes are currently white. I would have had to subtract something to get something to show up, but because we have it in this grayscale value, we have some kind of grayscale value to play with. Here I'm just messing with the X and Y amount, making sure it's something I like. And again, I'm gonna go back into our initial shape, and I just wanna mask it so it only appears on the X shape and not on the black areas. So you'll see me bring in just that shape and then plug that guy in. And once I do that, I can actually bring up the high offset a little bit more, and then we start seeing that pattern a little better. There's a levels right after the tile generator where I created those small circles, and that's just to get the shape of those circles to change a little bit. So just find something I like, and then again, I'm continuing to mess with the height offset just to see how much it's going to affect the material. Cool. Once I'm happy with those results, I go in with a height blend, and I'm going to blend it with our original frame. And here, this is where we can play with the values to see how much that is being indented into the frame. So you can see that here. Again, this is a value that I'm gonna go back and forth just to see how much push and pull I want. When I did add the blend, I noticed that we had a lip on the edge of the frame of the floor. And so what I decided to do is go back to the original transform of that kind of triangle shape and just move it to the side a little bit. That way we don't get that weird lip, which was kind of obstructing just the frame in general. And the cool thing was that because I had it on that transform with the mirror grayscale and the transform blended, as soon as I moved that single shape, it moved all 4 of them, which was really nice. Next up, I wanted to add some pipes right underneath this kind of X shape. So to do that, I just brought in a gradient linear 2, and I'm starting to mess with the tiling a little bit just to see how many pipes I'd like. One thing I wanted to do to break up just the kind of roundness of the pipes was just add like a little square shape, almost like almost like it's a connection point on an actual pipe, like you would see in the real world. So it's almost a connector piece that I just overlaid on top of one of the pipe shapes. So you'll see me doing a blend here, and then I change the blend modes to see which one would give me the result I'm looking for. So I left it on screen and just kind of moved it into place. Again, it was showing up on the top, so to stop that from happening, I just went back into the transform and made sure the tiling mode was set to no tiling. I rotated it because I wanted the pipes to go and flow with the floor kind of shape. And I wanted to break up just the kind of repeatiness of the shapes of the pipes. So what I did was I brought in another gradient linear, but with this guy, I made the pipes a little bit smaller, and then I went ahead and blended them, the two together. And like I said before, instead of using a mask to tell me like where the certain pipes will show up, I just used a crop. I like using the crops a lot because before I used to always bring in a shape and kind of make that how I chose where the mask went, and this just feels a lot easier to me. I know the gradient linear is going to give me some flat looking pipes, so I added a levels to kind of bring those up a little bit. And once we bring them into the height blend again, I'm going to move them into place in the height offset. So I'm just going to move them down so that they show up right underneath the X amount, or sorry, the X shape. And I noticed that even with the height offset, some of the pipes are kind of interpenetrating the X shape. So I went back and grabbed the mask from our initial, when we created that initial shape. And now as I move the height offset, it's only affecting those kind of triangle areas. Plug that guy in. And I was noticing that the pipes do look a little flat. So this is where I went in with the levels. Sorry, I actually went back into the X shape and brought that up a little bit, which then helped the pipes feel just a tad more rounder, I would say. So you can see as I'm going through the graph, I kind of go back and forth a lot. Here I'm still messing with the shape of the X, making sure it's not interpenetrating with the floor. And it's just a lot of back and forth. And this is where I started messing with the levels on the pipes. That way they start feeling a little bit more rounder, because before they were feeling really flat. So, and I noticed that we were having some weird artifacting just because the way the crop was cutting off. So what I ended up having to do was I took a transform on those smaller pipes. I still utilized the crop function, but I just used a transform to move them into a better location where the crop could better work in that area. So like there you can see now we don't have some weird artifacting on the smaller pipes. Again, just moving them into place so they don't mess with the bigger shapes as well. Cool. Again, I'm going ahead and adding a frame to every single section. That way we just keep the graph nice and clean, and I'm making sure where everything is all the time. Here I'm going to add some indents into the floor frame. So I almost wanted these sockets. So what I want to do is when I want to indent something, I always make sure to grab the shape and subtract it initially from the area I want it to be recessed in. So what I'm doing here is I'm just making a rectangle shape, and I went back and copied the transform and the mirror grayscale from back when I created those trapezoid shapes. The reason I did that because I knew once I plugged in the shape, they would be in the exact same location as a trapezoid, which is exactly what I wanted because that's where I'm going to want the indents. And as you can see now that we blended those with the subtract, we have this kind of recessed area. And what I'm going to do in the next part is I'm going to take the exact same shape, and I'm just going to do a height blend so it only affects those areas. That way the height maps aren't competing with one another. So as the graph becomes bigger, I go ahead and move the outputs to the right more and more. So the original shape of the rectangle from the indents, I still am going to use that, but I wanted to have almost like a cut line on that shape. So what you see that I did there was I took another rectangle shape and I squashed it down, and I just add a subtle bevel. So once I blend the two together, it's going to look almost like a cut line on that shape. So just moving everything into place. I accidentally pressed the print screen key instead of delete there, so that's why we got that weird dialogue there. I have GreenShot installed, so in case you were wondering where that came from. And here, like I said before, once I started blending the two shapes, I get a nice little cut line there, just a little small little detail that makes a difference instead of just having a big piece of metal there. So it almost like feels like a socket or something, or a clamp. So because I used, again, the same transform and mirror grayscale, they're all going to be in the exact same place. I'm bringing in a height blend, and I'm going to... I initially used just a regular blend, but I wasn't liking the results I was getting, so I deleted that and brought in a height blend. And I'm just messing with the height offset. That way they show up a little bit. So right there, once I plug it in, you kind of see the result we get. So we get that nice indentation from when we subtracted that kind of slot piece. But then now that we have that to play with, I can just, it's almost like pushing and pulling that shape on the metal frame. Once again, I'm going ahead and adding some frames, making sure they're named accordingly. So next I wanted to add, I'm going to do the same kind of treatment that I did with those clamp shapes that we just finished, but this time I wanted to add some subtle bolts in there. And the location of these are going to be a little bit different. They're going to be on the tops and the bottoms of this floor panel. So I created two basic shapes, so a square and a circle. I added the two, that way we get almost this kind of gravestone looking pattern. I would like call it like half a capsule or something like that. And I'm just going to do a subtle bevel, that way we get just a nice like bevel on it. And it's not like one of those hard edges like I described in the very beginning, where we can either add a bevel or a blur. It just makes the normal map read it a lot better. Again, same treatment. Go on ahead and just eyeballing where I want it. I know it's not perfect right now, and I did the same thing with the mirror grayscale because I want it all on four sides. and I'm gonna plug it in, and instantly I can see that that's not what I was looking for, but it's more so just to have it there. And the nice thing is I can go with the transform and really fine tune exactly where I want it. And because I'm just messing with one of them and the mirrored grayscale is plugged in, it's affecting on all of them. I noticed on the grayscale I didn't have the right mode on here, so now it's affecting the top and the bottom of this guy. Once I have the indent all finished, I'm essentially going to take the same graph and just remove the square shape, and I'm going to blend in the that kind of circle shape to act almost like a bolt in this sense. So I took the shape, moved it up a little bit, and then again I'm adding a bevel, and I'm going to take the same transform and mirror grayscale, so I know that they will be in the same position as the indents. And I'm just going to do a blend, and then just I set it to a subtract, or sorry, not a subtract, a max lighten. And there we go, we have some small little bolts there. And then I go back and kind of mess with the different values on the indent as well as the bolt itself. I go through the blending mode with my scroll wheel, that way I can quickly choose and see the different blend modes and kind of see what each blend mode is doing super quickly. And I ended up leaving at max line with a subtle 0.59 opacity. So next up, on the bottom of the panel, you'll notice that when I initially added that square shape and I cropped it out, I wanted to, there's like almost like a bigger kind of stepping piece. And I always wanted to, when I did that, I knew down the line, I wanted to add a rubber indent on there, almost like just a grip kind of if you're stepping on it or something. So I took a shape and I transformed it. I put the transform because I'm going to move it into place, and then I just added a bevel, but on the bevel I actually brought up the smoothness a lot. That way the bevel isn't like this hard, sharp bevel, but more so it's like it's just more subtle and just rounder. So you'll notice if I go back into the bevel and just bring up the smoothness, you can see how we have those hard edges, but as soon as I start bringing up the smoothing, it almost rounds it out a little bit. Bring down the opacity a bit, and I made sure to set the blend mode to subtract. Here I'm just going in the different 3D view meshes, so I put it on a high res plane because I just want to see it more so as if it were acting almost like a floor plane, a floor piece or something like that. So on that rubber kind of indentation we did, I wanted to add a pattern, kind of like what we did with the X shape, where I added some circles and just kind of did an offset of those. I want to do the same thing, but more so with a capsule shape. So here I'm doing a circle, and then I transformed it and then mirror grayscaled, and then I did a square, and I'm blending those two together, and now we got a nice capsule shape. I took a transform and I'm just scaling it down a bit, again turning off the no tiling, and then I squashed it a little bit, And then this guy is going to be plugged into a tile generator. So once it's in the tile generator, I just go ahead and mess with a bunch of different parameters. I basically wanted the shape to go in an angled direction, so it's not exactly up or down, but just more so in an angled orientation. And I messed with the X and Y amount to something that I liked. And I made sure to put the offset at 0.5 so they're not aligned top to bottom, but more so just slightly offset with every single line going down. I was messing here thinking I could maybe mess with the different mass to get a different result, but I ended up not going with that and just leaving it how it was. Again, I'm going back into the rotation to see what kind of angles I can get. And again, I went in and messed with the angles as well. So once I had that, I basically took a blend and I overlaid it, or sorry, I didn't. I just set it to add, but then I went back into our initial shape of that indent. That way it's being used as a mask. So only that area is going to get that pattern. Here I'm messing with the opacity, and I ended up leaving it on blending mode of add. With the add, it conformed a little bit better with the smoothing of the bevel that we initially had on the indent. So there you can kind of see that's kind of conforming to the shape. And I didn't like that you could only see 2 lines on the rubber piece, so I went ahead and mess with the offset so we get at least 3 of them, or I just wanted to break up the offset just slightly. So one of the last things I did was I noticed that whenever I tiled this piece in particular, there wasn't any sort of almost lips on the edge of this guy. So what I did was I went back to the beginning of the graph and I took the initial shape of the frame, and you can see me doing it here. I just did an edge detect and I messed with a few of the values here. I wanted something kind of thin, and once I add the bevel, it gets even more thinner. So here you can kind of see me moving with the distance, and I just needed something subtle like that. Like as I'm moving down the distance, it's getting less and less apparent what's going on. But once I add the transform, I basically almost scaled it up. That way I moved it just on the edges of the actual texture, and you can see the kind of difference that it's making. So right here, it's not in place just yet, but once I move it to exactly where I want it, so I make sure at least I get half of that edge, you can see now that we have almost this lip on our floor now. So every time it tiles, you're gonna be able to see that nice subtle lip indent when it's when you have 2 of the floor pieces next to each other, which is a nice little detail there. So here I'm almost ready to start making the albedo here, so I'm just moving more stuff into place. And this section is more so about I'm creating here the paint shipping mask, and I'm not going to add this into the height necessarily, but it's more going to be used as a mask for when I'm chipping away at the paint on the actual metal pieces. So what I do is I just bring in two ambient occlusions. One of them is inverted, and I mess with the height depth so I get some different settings. I bring in a moisture noise, but you could play around with different noises. Each one gives a different result, so make sure to test them out. And then I bring in a quantize. Quantize is a nice way to make almost like your noises or whatever you plug in to be just, you get like set values so they're not all kind of mixing together, whereas you can definitively see like the different values of gray in that guy. Whereas before, when you just bring on the moisture noise, it's kind of splotched all over. I blended that with the inverted ambient occlusion, and then I did another invert grayscale. And then here I'm just leveling it out. That way we can kind of see the underlying pattern from the underlying texture, but also we're blending in that moisture noise that we had there. So with the second ambient occlusion, I brought in a levels and I switched the blacks and the whites to invert a bit, and then I'm messing with the levels again. Here I'm just blending the two together. So anywhere you see the white as I'm bringing up the opacity, that's where the chipping is going to originate at first. So it's like once I add the histogram scan, it's going to start chipping at the white areas a lot more than the areas that are in black. So you can see instantly right there, once I start bringing up the position, you'll notice that the areas in white are just getting chipped a little bit more. You won't necessarily see it here until I actually plug it into one of the albedo colors. Cool. Again, just going in and saving. So this is basically where I'm just going to start going in and creating my colors and my albedo for this guy. So I'm going to be sampling, you'll see me sampling a bunch of different colors, and that's because I'm sampling from the original graph. So I basically just used kind of a dark gray for the metals. And then honestly here, it's just going back through your graph and finding areas or nodes that can act as a mask. So you'll see now that we have the two different metals, and that's based on the mask that we just plugged in. But I noticed that actually the mask isn't giving me what I wanted at first. I actually wanted the darker metal to be on the outskirt of the frame. So once I start messing with this guy, I'll actually add an invert to the frame metal color. Again, I go back and it's almost like reading left to right on the graph. So as I built the different pieces, I'm just going back and doing the exact same thing almost, but with just uniform colors. So I'm just going back through each and every piece that I made and just finding masks that will help me build out the colors. And that's why it's important when I was initially creating the height map, I made sure to have everything labeled and kind of everything neat. That way I can easily go back and find where certain masks would be to use my uniform colors. So this is where I realized that I actually wanted these to be flipped. So I just go ahead and do that. And then as you can see, I added 2 different reds on this guy. This second uniform color is actually going to be the second set of pipes. But what I did here was, again, instead of using the crop function to get the different height values to blend in between each other, I'm using it to get the 2 different colors to blend between each other. And then inside the opacity mask input is just that area of where the pipes are actually sitting. So again, just like how I was making the height maps nice and organized, I always make sure to do the same thing with albedo. Because once we start building the albedo, we're going to go in and create the metalness and the roughness as well. So here I'm basically going in and just copying the several different blends that I'm using. And I'm just, again, sampling the different uniform colors from the original graph. Again, I'm just going back and finding the different masks for each said piece. So it's just, you're basically just building up the albedo with the different masks that you initially created when you're creating your height map. I'm just trying to find different metal colors when I'm creating these different pieces. That way it's a nice breakup on the surface. So this is where that mask that we created earlier comes into play. You can kind of see what are the results here. So you don't see much of it right now. And I also moved down the mask just to have it somewhere where it doesn't interrupt all the other connection points. That's one of the biggest thing I try to avoid and tell people is avoid the spaghetti as much as possible. Because with your more complex graphs, it can be a lot harder to find things. So once I bump this up a lot, you can kind of see how it's chipping away at the paint that we have applied. So it's a nice, cool result that we can go back and forth and kind of mess with the slider and get some different results. We can either make it super grunged up and destroyed and chipped away, or we can just leave it something simple. So with this part, you notice that I'm adding a yellow. I basically took the original shape when we were creating that X piece. Because I like that triangle, I wanted to create almost like a set of decals that go on top of the floor frame, almost like a sticker. So here you see me taking that exact same shape, but I'm just going to transform it and do a mirror on each side. And then I'm just going to move them into place. And this is one of those instances where certain shapes or certain elements don't necessarily have to be in the height map. You can just do it as you're creating your albedo or something. And as you see me doing here, I'm going to add this just on the normal map. So again, I plugged it in just to see the kind of results I'm getting, and once I know what's going on, it's really quick for me to just go back in the transform and then just move it into place exactly where I wanted. I'm making sure not to get it right on the rubber piece either. But I don't like the fact that it's just showing up on the albedo color because it's not really giving me that depth and almost that effect like a sticker or something. I wanted to have like some sort of lip or some sort of just raised appearance. So this is where I'm actually moving the normal into place right underneath those stickers, because I know I'm going to take that same shape that we use to create just the shape of the stickers overall. And here you can see that I create a normal map out of that, and I take a normal blend and blend the two. Again, I'm using that mask to tell the normal blend to combine those two. So now we have some actual normal map information on those stickers. And now you can see that we have a nice little lip. So it's not just showing up flat on the albedo. Continuing on down the albedo, this is the part where I'm going to incorporate the rubber indent color. So I want it to be a lot darker than just the darkest part of the metal. That way we get a different material read when we're adding the metalness and the roughness. So you can see there we're getting distinct differences between like where the metal piece and the rubber piece are now. Again, I just went ahead and moved the normal map a little bit because I know I'm going to be utilizing it in this coming part. So I chose a brown because this is what our dirt color will be. And if you've seen any other tutorial of mine, you'll notice that I use the dirt node a lot. It's one of my favorite nodes to use. And the dirt node creates a nice mask based off of your ambient occlusion, your normal map, and your curvature. So I go ahead and plug in my ambient, and then I take a curvature smooth and I plug the normal map into that and just make sure it's an OpenGL. And I plug that guy into the dirt as well, because the more maps you have plugged into the dirt, the more the kind of better results you'll get from that guy. So instantly you'll see that it's a little bit too kind of intense. So just bringing down the contrast, bringing down the dirt level. We don't want it to be super intense, but just subtle enough. And we're almost done with our albedo. The last finishing touch I always add is doing a curvature smooth overlay. It almost acts like a cavity, and you basically bring in the same curvature node that you had plugged into the dirt. I like to keep them separate. I could essentially take that curvature and just make a node that connects it to this guy, but just for cleanliness, I make sure it's separate. The curvature smooth comes out as it's a grayscale node. So because we want to overlay it on all these different colors from our albedo, you have to make sure to plug in a gradient which turns the grayscale into a color output, and that way you can actually use a blend between the two. Because if you just try to plug in that curvature smooth onto the blend, it's gonna break the connection and won't let you. And here I make sure to add the curvature to an add sub and just mess with the opacity. It kind of gives you some nice highlights on the actual shapes of the height map and normal map. So it kind of almost accentuates the shapes that you have already. So here I'm going to start pretty much doing the exact same thing we did with the albedo, but now I'm going to start doing that with the metalness. I like doing metalness kind of first because it's just black and white values. And the way I have it set up currently is you'll notice that I have the albedo up on top, and basically all the different connections of said like mask that we use to tell which pieces are which colors are coming from the bottom. And the nice thing here is that because all these connections are coming from the bottom, we're literally just going to take the same connections and we're basically looking at a top to bottom kind of orientation. So wherever I have the albedo for said like metal colors, like you see me doing here, I'm just going to make the metal colors right underneath and kind of continue that sort of treatment as I go down the line. Now, one thing I wanted to add onto the metalness is some scratches. I'm going to add this eventually to the roughness and to the albedo later on, but I just wanted to get it into the metalness first. Again, this is one of those kind of side mini graphs that you don't necessarily put in the height. It's more so just for kind of adding to just the secondary maps. So kind of like what we did with the normal map the decal stickers that are not necessarily on the height map. We added those after the fact. These are just some more details that we're adding after the fact. So here you can just see me messing with all the different parameters in the scratch generator. I love using this guy. It's super easy to make some scratches, and you mess with a few different parameters and you get some kind of cool results. Now, one thing that I like to do to break up the amount of scratches on this guy is I do add a purlin noise and do a subtract blend mode on this guy. That way the scratches aren't appearing everywhere. It's just on certain areas depending on what kind of noise you plug in. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a purlin. You can do a moisture noise or whatever kind of noise you want, just to break it up so it's not always going to be scratches everywhere. And here I'm actually making space because I made the scratches. I want to make sure I have space for when I add it to the roughness and to the albedo eventually. So I'm going ahead and plugging these guys in, and I'm using that just as the mask for this guy. So the scratches are going to be underlying. So when you're scratching these guys off, you're going to be able to see the metal underneath. So it's going to be white. Can't really see them too much right now. It's only when you bring in the roughness of those scratches is that we're going to be able to kind of see them a little bit better. Again, just making sure everything's in place. Always like to keep my graphs nice and neat. And again, what I mentioned earlier is we're basically copying the same two nodes of the roughness and also the blend mode, but we're bringing in the connections from the bottom like we did with the albedos. So like I said before, it's a top to bottom. You're looking at it. Once you see it in the albedo, you'll know once you look down that you'll see the other different maps as well. I find that this is like a really quick and easy way to make sure everything is noticeable, and you can quickly see and iterate and see what is going on with each different mask that you're adding in here. So there I just added the indent. go. That way the scratches aren't appearing, because the indent was added later on after the scratches. So it's going to work almost in the Photoshop mentality where that layer is on top of what's underneath, so you won't see it. It's going to get masked out. So there you saw me just adding the dirt onto the metalness. So anywhere where there's dirt, it's going to be white. And here I decided to move the normal map down just because I know I'm going to eventually add the roughness and I don't want it to interfere. I know it started getting a little bit messy. So now we have this whole center area to work on, and that's going to be our roughness. So again, it's all about just pretty much at this point, you're pretty much duplicating the different node setup. So it's going to always be the two uniform colors, the blend, and then you're plugging in the mask for every different area. And you're just at this point pretty much messing with the different values of grayscale. You're telling the material how much, or what is rough and what is smooth and stuff like that. And this is where I feel like the material really comes to life, and you can kind of see how the different parts that you created are starting to give some nice breakup. So I wanted the pipes to be a little bit shinier than just the overall frame of the floor. So making sure those a little bit darker. And I also went back and just toned down the chipping. I originally had it super high just to kind of show what was going on, but I don't want it to be too intense. Because if it's too intense, you're definitely going to be able to see the repeatedness of it once it's all next to each other. And on these metal clamps, I for sure knew I wanted to get them super reflective, so we're getting like a much darker gray value there. And I'm just continuing down the line and using the same masks as before. So that's where I did the chipping, and once I added a little bit with that roughness, now you can clearly see the chipping of the metal underneath. Same thing with the decals. I wanted them to be a little bit shiny, but not as shiny as metal, but just have some sort of reflective value to it, just like you would any other sticker. It's kind of has some sort of sheen on it. Here we're doing the rubber indent, and rubber dent doesn't tend to be too reflective depending on what kind it is, so I made sure to make that's probably the dullest part of the material as far as the roughness value. besides the dirt. So the dirt might be a little bit kind of duller, so pretty similar. And this is where I went back and I realized like I should probably add the scratches into this guy. And once I plug this guy in, you can definitely see the changes on the material. So now when the light hits it, we get some nice scratches on it. Super subtle, but you know, less is more. Once the light hits it, it gives a nice breakup on the flat surfaces. So looking pretty cool. I wanted them to, I know I originally used the Perlin noise to break it up, but I just wanted them to be a little bit more pronounced. So I mess with the opacity just so that they show up a little bit more. And here I'm just making sure our final outputs are all nice and neat. Going back and making sure everything is okay. This is where I moved those scratches, and I'm going to add them onto the albedo as well. So I'm just moving stuff around a little bit. Taking that same mask and introducing a color that'll kind of accentuate the scratches a little bit more than that dark gray. So maybe white or something like that. Cool. Going back, introducing just some chipping, maybe pushing it a little bit, nothing too crazy. You can leave it something as intense, but I noticed that when I did add the chipping, I felt like the metal, well, the first thing I did was I didn't want the chipping to show up on the X shape. So I went looking for a mask that that would work to mask that piece out. So what I did is I just blended that over our mask. So now once I connect it again, you can see that it's only affecting the pipes and a little bit of the floor pieces. One thing I didn't like about the chipping was that it felt a little bit too reflective. So once I went in and fixed that subtle graph, I went in and fixed that towards the end and added those final outputs, making sure everything is nice and organized and just looking at it one final time. Cool. So that pretty much covers it. Hope you guys enjoyed it and learned something. Next up, we're going to focus on creating the grate that overlays on top of this guy. So to get started with the grate material, I'm just going to go and do the same thing that we did previously. Go to File, New Substance, and I'm going to name the file accordingly, so grate 01. I go back into my floor material, and what I'm doing is I went back and copied all the output nodes. That way I don't have to recreate them. I could have easily gone ahead and just did the same method we did previously again with the base material, but Since the outputs were already there with the correct settings, I just grabbed those. So here you see me once again just getting some preliminary values. That way, as soon as I connect something, it'll all be ready to go. To get started with the gray, I started out with a 3-sided polygon and I rotated it so it's going straight up or down. Sometimes it's kind of tricky to get those values in, so I always set those to 0 and then I just rotate accordingly. From here, I plugged in a tile sampler and I just did pattern input and I messed with the scale of these guys so they are touching a little bit closer to each other. And this is where I start plugging in most of my outputs. That way, once again, I can clearly see what's going on in the 3D viewport really early on. From there, I brought in an edge detect because I only want the edges of these triangles to show up, so it kind of starts feeling like a grate a little bit. And then I brought in a safe transform to rotate it. I use a safe transform instead of a regular transformation because sometimes with complex shapes, transforms might break your tiling of your pattern. So with safe transform, it's an easy way to keep the pattern consistent. And the last thing I did was I went back into the tile sampler and I offsetted the pattern a little bit. So there we get this kind of pattern where it looks like it's all like an almost like an octagon shape. And like I mentioned previously with the floor, I added a slight high quality blur just to give it some sort of bevel on those edges. Now here you're actually seeing me create a brand new output node, and it's just as easy as searching for outputs in your however you create your node. And we're actually going to create an opacity node. So once that is all connected, we can finally see through this guy, and that's exactly what we want, because once we bring it into the editor in game, we want to have that opacity map. That way we're able to just put it on top of our floor material and you can still see what's behind it. So here I'm going back and I'm actually messing with the metallic and roughness early on. So I set the metallic to be white because I know I wanted the gray to be metallic, and I set the roughness to something high. That way we get a nice sheen on it really early on. And honestly, the only other thing that I added on this guy was we're doing the same treatment that we did on the floor. So the kind of the same dirt node that we used, I'm just applying that to this guy. So it's a pretty simple graph as we're just keeping things pretty preliminary, and we're mostly focusing on the metal material and just adding the dirt on top of it. So here you see me keeping everything organized. I want to keep everything organized like we had on the old one. So we start with the albedo on top, then the roughness, then the metallic at the bottom. So I'm just using the same mask from the dirt node that we got and applying it to each separate channel. Making sure everything is reading okay. And here's where I kind of start messing with the dirt a little bit. I wanted to give it a little bit more punch to it. That way we can clearly see the material definition when we're rotating the sky around in the 3D viewport. I thought that was a little strong, so I toned down the contrast and even the dirt level, because I wanted the metal to show more than anything, so we don't lose that, because it was getting a little bit too dull with all that dirt. And one of the last things I like to do on the albedo is just add the curvature. That way it's almost acts like a nice cavity on top, which really accentuates the shapes that you have in your albedo. And from here, I mean, we can go back and start messing with the roundness of the edges of those triangles. So I mean, even right there, I bumped the edge around this all the way up, and we got some interesting patterns of the circles. That wasn't intended, but figured it's a nice way to get different patterns there. But the edge around this affects how each of these kind of corners of these triangles are connected, so we have a little bit more of a piece connecting there. Also, I'm messing with the edge width. I don't want them to be too thick, but also not too thin. And finally, I just go ahead and save it out. Pretty simple graph, nothing too complex, but it's gonna give us a nice overlay on our floor material, so it looks like we have a nice grading on top of it. And that pretty much covers this last lesson. Feel free to take both those different tiling materials and render them however you like. You can take them in Unreal, you can take them in the Marmoset, but would love to see what you guys come up with. Thanks for watching.